Section 6 of The World as Will and Idea. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Daniel Fraser. The World as Will and Idea, Volume 1 by Arthur Schopenhauer. Translated by R.B. Haldane and J. Kemp. First book, The World as Idea, First Aspect, Section 8. As from the direct light of the sun to the borrowed light of the moon, we pass from the immediate idea of perception, which stands by itself and is its own warrant, to reflection, to the abstract, discursive concepts of the reason, which obtain their whole content from knowledge of perception and in relation to it. As long as we continue simply to perceive, all is clear, firm, and certain. There are neither questions, nor doubts, nor errors. We desire to go no further, can go no further. We find rest in perceiving, and satisfaction in the present. Perception suffices for itself, and therefore what springs purely from it, and remains true to it, for example, a genuine work of art, can never be false, nor can it be discredited through the lapse of time, for it does not present an opinion, but the thing itself. But with abstract knowledge, with reason, doubt and error appear in the theoretical, care and sorrow in the practical. In the idea of perception, illusion may at moments take the place of the real. But in the sphere of abstract thought, error may reign for 1,000 years, impose its yoke upon whole nations, extend to the noblest impulses of humanity, and by the help of its slaves and its dupes, may chain and fetter those whom it cannot deceive. It is the enemy against which the wisest men of all times have waged unequal war, and only what they have won from it has become the possession of mankind. Therefore, it is well to draw attention to it at once, as we already tread the ground to which its province belongs. It has often been said that we ought to follow truth, even although no utility can be seen in it, because it may have indirect utility, which may appear when it is least expected. And I would add to this that we ought to be just as anxious to discover and to root out all error, even when no harm is anticipated from it, because its mischief may be very indirect, and may suddenly appear when we do not expect it, for all error has poison at its heart. If it is mind, if it is knowledge, that makes man the lord of creation, there can be no such thing as harmless error, still less venerable and holy error. And for the consolation of those who in any way and at any time may have devoted strength and life to the noble and hard battle against error, I cannot refrain from adding that, so long as truth is absent, error will have free play, as owls and bats in the night. But sooner would we expect to see the owls and the bats drive back the sun in the eastern heavens, than that any truth which has once been known and distinctly and fully expressed can ever again be so utterly vanquished and overcome that the old error shall once more reign undisturbed over its wide kingdom. This is the power of truth. Its conquest is slow and laborious, but if once the victory be gained, it can never be wrested back again. Besides the ideas we have as yet considered, which, according to their construction, could be referred to time, space, and matter, if we consider them with reference to the object, or to pure sensibility and understanding, i.e., knowledge of causality, if we consider them with reference to the subject, another faculty of knowledge has appeared in man alone of all earthly creatures, an entirely new consciousness, which, with very appropriate and significant exactness, is called reflection. For it is, in fact, derived from the knowledge of perception, and is a reflected appearance of it. But it has assumed a nature fundamentally different. The forms of perception do not affect it, and even the principle of sufficient reason which reigns over all objects has an entirely different aspect with regard to it. It is just this new, more highly endowed consciousness, this abstract reflex of all that belongs to perception in that conception of the reason which has nothing to do with perception, that gives to man that thoughtfulness which distinguishes his consciousness so entirely from that of the lower animals, and through which his whole behaviour upon earth is so different from that of his irrational fellow creatures. He far surpasses them in power, and also in suffering. They live in the present alone. He lives also in the future and the past. They satisfy the needs of the moment. He provides, by the most ingenious preparations for the future, yea, for days that he shall never see. They are entirely dependent on the impression of the moment, on the effect of the perceptible motive. He is determined by abstract conceptions, independent of the present. Therefore, he follows predetermined plans, he acts from maxims, without reference to his surroundings or the accidental impression of the moment. Thus, for example, he can make with composure deliberate preparations for his own death. He can dissemble past finding out, and can carry his secret with him to the grave. Lastly, he has an actual choice between several motives, for only in the abstract can such motives, present together in consciousness, afford the knowledge with regard to themselves that the one excludes the other, and can thus measure themselves against each other with reference to their power over the will. The motive that overcomes, in that it decides the question at issue, is the deliberate determinant of the will, and is a sure indication of its character. The brute, on the other hand, is determined by the present impression. Only the fear of present compulsion can constrain its desires, until at last this fear has become custom, and as such continues to determine it. This is called training. The brute feels and perceives. Man, in addition to this, thinks and knows. Both will. The brute expresses its feelings and dispositions by gestures and sounds. Man communicates his thoughts to others, or, if he wishes, he conceals it, by means of speech. Speech is the first production, and also the necessary organ of his reason. Therefore, in Greek and Italian, speech and reason are expressed by the same word. O logos, il discorso. Vernunft is derived from vernehmen, which is not a synonym for the verb to hear, but signifies the consciousness of the meaning of thoughts communicated in words. It is by the help of language alone that reason accomplishes its most important achievements. The united action of several individuals, the planned cooperation of many thousands, civilization the state. Also, science, the storing up of experience, the uniting of common properties in one concept, the communication of truth, the spread of error, thoughts and poems, dogmas and superstitions. The brute first knows death when it dies, but man draws consciously nearer to it every hour that he lives, and this makes life, at times, a questionable good, even to him who has not recognised this character of constant annihilation in the whole of life. Principally on this account, man has philosophies and religions, though it is uncertain whether the qualities we admire most in his conduct, voluntary rectitude, and nobility of feeling, were ever the fruit of either of them. As results which certainly belong only to them, and as productions of reason in this sphere, we may refer to the marvellous and monstrous opinions of philosophers of various schools, and the extraordinary and sometimes cruel customs of the priests of different religions. It is the universal opinion of all times and of all nations, that these manifold and far-reaching achievements spring from a common principle, from that peculiar intellectual power which belongs distinctively to man, and which has been called reason, oiloios, toilogistikon, toilogimon, ratio. Besides this, no one finds any difficulty in recognizing the manifestations of this faculty, and in saying what is rational and what is irrational, where reason appears as distinguished from the other faculties and qualities of man, or lastly, in pointing out what, on account of the want of reason, we must never expect even from the most sensible brute. The philosophers of all ages may be said to be on the whole at one about this general knowledge of reason, and they have also given prominence to several very important manifestations of it, such as the control of the emotions and passions, the capacity for drawing conclusions and formulating general principles, even such as are true prior to all experience, and so forth. Still, all their explanations of the peculiar nature of reason are wavering, not clearly defined, discursive, without unity and concentration, now laying stress on one manifestation, now on another, and therefore often at variance with each other. Besides this, many start from the opposition between reason and revelation, a distinction which is unknown to philosophy, and which only increases confusion. It is very remarkable that up till now no philosopher has referred these manifold expressions of reason to one simple function which would be recognized in them all, from which they would all be explained, and which would therefore constitute the real inner nature of reason. It is true that the excellent Locke, in the Essay on the Human Understanding, Book 2, Chapter 11, Sections 10 and 11, very rightly refers to general concepts as the characteristic which distinguishes man from the brutes, and Leibniz quotes this with full approval in the Nouveau Essai sur l'entendement humain, Book 2, Chapter 11, Sections 10 and 11. But when Locke, in Book 4, Chapter 17, Sections 2 and 3, comes to the special explanation of reason, he entirely loses sight of this simple primary characteristic, and he also falls into a wavering, undetermined, incomplete account of mangled and derivative manifestations of it. Leibniz also, in the corresponding part of his work, behaves in a similar manner, only with more confusion and indistinctness. In the appendix, I have fully considered how Kant confused and falsified the conception of the nature of reason. But whoever will take the trouble to go through, in this reference, the mass of philosophical writing which has appeared since Kant, will find out that, as the faults of princes must be expiated by whole nations, the errors of great minds extend their influence over whole generations, and even over centuries. They grow and propagate themselves, and finally degenerate into monstrosities. All this arises from the fact that, as Berkeley says, few men think, yet all will have opinions. The understanding has only one function: immediate knowledge of the relation of cause and effect. Yet the perception of the real world, and all common sense, sagacity, and inventiveness, however multifarious their applications may be, are quite clearly seen to be nothing more than manifestations of that one function. So also the reason has one function, and from it all the manifestations of reason we have mentioned, which distinguish the life of man from that of the brutes, may easily be explained. The application or the non-application of this function is all that is meant by what men have everywhere and always called rational and irrational. Footnote 12. Compare with this paragraph sections 26 and 27 of the third edition of the Essay on the Principle of Sufficient Reason. End of first book, The World as Idea, first aspect, section 8. Recording by Daniel Fraser.